Like sometimes people will be like, oh, I got around it this way, I got around it that way. So my impression from talking to sources at Amazon is if you sidestep when it comes to this UPC issue, because they're really trying to avoid things like counterfeits. And my conspiracy theory, I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on.
Welcome to Top of Search with Robin and Abe, where we talk about e-commerce, Amazon, and more.
This is the Top of Search podcast, and today we're talking specifically about UPCs. Now, kind of in the last couple of months have been dominated by Wicked. We're going to talk about GS1, UPCs, and GTINs. Oh my. So we have a whole bunch of things that we want to talk to you about when it comes to GTINs. And Abe, did you want to start for people who are newer to Amazon, they might not realize why this is even a topic, especially if they come from managing a traditional brand.
Yeah, it's interesting because as of today, you probably live in the world of UPCs a little bit more than I do. But in the recent past leading up to this, I think I had a little bit more to do with it, or as much to do with it. So for those of you who don't know how UPCs work, in Amazon's catalog, they require a identifying number. That identifying number can be either an ASIN, which is Amazon's own identification system. Hopefully, I don't have to explain what an ASIN is, but it is Amazon's own system for labeling and numbering all of the SKUs that they sell. The other type of identifying number is a UPC. A UPC is actually universal. That is a system of barcodes and a system of identifying numbers and serial numbers, which goes through the entire world of selling and buying things. When you go to a supermarket, a UPC for a product can usually be scanned in any supermarket, and they'll know what that thing is. The UPC is known in the world, and GS1 is a company that keeps the records of everything. Now, Amazon requires us to use one or the other. They do generally require every product in their system to have a UPC. They start off with the UPC, they add their ASIN on later. Now, the way that it used to work in the past is everybody was relaxed about how directly the UPC was connected to the product. And UPCs could be reused and UPCs could be resold. What that turned into was a marketplace for used UPCs. If you would buy a UPC from GS1, it would cost whatever it cost. If you would buy it from a reseller on eBay or another place, you could get like 1,000 UPCs for $10 or something, which is much less than GS1. And what sellers would traditionally do is there was no reason to go to GS1 unless you were selling genuinely in all of the stores of the world that required a legitimate new UPC tied to you. So anybody who was just selling on Amazon would go to these resellers, buy a UPC or a block of UPCs, and use them for their products. What that led to was a very cluttered catalog in which all of these reused UPCs were being tagged to many versions of the same product, were being tagged to the wrong product in a situation where the old UPC was registered on Amazon. It led to a situation where people were looking for a UPC, typing it into Amazon and getting the wrong product because the UPC was resold. At some point, Amazon said, this is too disorganized. Let us clamp down. And the fact that we used to let you do this does not mean we're letting it happen anymore. Amazon started to require valid, correct UPCs that only came from GS1 and are directly linked to your product. So that's the sort of little history.
In the early days of the Wild Wild West, that kind of chaos didn't really matter because most big brands weren't actively selling directly on Amazon anyway. It was primarily resellers that were bringing these brands, or Amazon was selling them through their 1P channel. And so they were able to handle it. As more brands started to sell directly, what happened is brand ABC would come in and they'd be like, well, this is the UPC that we use for Walmart and Home Depot and everybody else. And they would go to put it in and the system would say that UPC is already taken, or it would cause some other issue. So Amazon has started to crack down. Now they started this crackdown years ago with big brands saying, if you want to list for Disney to try to avoid people creating listings that were unauthorized, a Disney item has to have a Disney UPC. And they've gotten progressively more strict about this. And in the last 6 months, they have gotten very strict. At Accelerate, I took a couple of things that we were dealing with a few brands. And the basic response was, it's always been this policy. If you didn't follow it, that's your problem, and you need to start over with a new listing. So there are a couple things I want to share with you. One is a client that reused their own UPC for a new product like 10 years ago. And then also, if you have a product that you are bringing to the marketplace or you're starting to create, it's really important that you think through and are ready to know exactly what brand you want to use on Amazon before you purchase the GTIN. And so just for those of you who are not familiar, GTIN is like the global trade identification number. UPCs are what is primarily used for physical products in the US. And so on Amazon, you pretty much have to have, unless it's a book, and then it would be an ISBN, you would have to have a UPC, or you need to get an exemption. And for a long time, people were using these exemptions to try to say, well, I have a couple of different products, so I'm going to create bundles. And some of the bundles were great and they really helped customers. And some bundles were like 2 things of garlic powder with a bracelet. And that doesn't help the shopper experience. And so Amazon's been trying to crack down on that more. So recently, they also announced that for bundles, the UPC has to be tied to the original brand owner. They changed some of the bundling policies, and the bundles have been like a contentious issue on Amazon and, a really profitable way to kind of sidestep some things for a long time. But it's getting a lot harder. But I think the first thing that we want to make sure that we're looking at is, even if you have a UPC and you have brand registry, before you print it on your product, it's important that you check the UPC in Seller Central to make sure it's valid. We've had people that have purchased UPCs since GS1 can sometimes recycle. We had a brand, a Shark Tank brand that bought a UPC from GS1, did all the right things, but it had a product already on it on Amazon. So we had to go back and get a new UPC and reprint that packaging, or, add stickers onto it, because they weren't able to use that UPC because it already had been taken.
How can you check UPC?
So before you create your products, what you would do is in Seller Central, you'd enter in the UPC. You want to make sure no products come up for that particular UPC. And then I recommend just to hold it, because sometimes, things, you never know where those recycled numbers are going to come from, that you create a shell listing, which is basically a skeleton of the listing. It just has basic stuff. And then we create it with a future launch date, so it does not go live, and just have that hold the space for the listing. This is especially important if you're planning on selling through retail channels as well as Amazon, or you're planning on printing the UPC directly on your product.
So that's all amazing. That's all very good. Some of this I didn't know or never really had to deal with. But as soon as you said, check it in Seller Central, what if somebody needs to check many UPCs? Say somebody is selling apparel and they need to upload like 8 sizes. Are they reduced to typing 8 different UPCs, or is there a way to check in bulk?
You could just create a shell listing for all of them and then see what airs out on upload. So if we had a large number like that, clothing usually will end up with a GTIN exemption. And that's usually where we're going to say, hey, Amazon, it's not realistic for us to have a different UPC for each of these. And now they're requiring more and more proof and reasons why. It used to be a given, but it's still pretty easy if you have an established brand and you're part of brand registry. But I imagine they're going to continue to tighten that as well. We have seen approvals for GTINs getting a little bit harder over the last year to 6 months. So still not impossible, but something that you can do.
And when you say approvals for GTINs, do you mean approvals for GTIN exemptions?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
GTIN exemptions. Yes.
I thought so. Always better to make sure. Okay. I know you have this edge case, but does it happen often that the UPCs from GS1 are recycled?
I think with the listings that we created last year, we ran across it maybe 10 times, but we create a lot of listings. So,
10 is still a lot.
Yeah.
Listen, 10, even if you created thousands of listings, something that happens 0.1% is still a moderately decent chance for any person creating a listing. So yeah, it does sound like it needs to be validated. But in a case like that, though, the first time you realized it, did Amazon give you a hard time about fixing the UPC? I mean, about replacing it?
Well, the first time what we did is we were like, well, this is our UPC. If they have a UPC and you can show that it's been in use for a while, you might be able to, we call it being professionally persistent. So we have like 3 people on our team that just submit seller support cases and escalate them every day. So we were able to get some of those changed, but it is a very uphill climb. There has to be a really good reason for it sometimes. And that's really going to only be for our much larger brands that changing the UPC just isn't an option for. If you have a new biz development rep, sometimes a SaaS rep, they might be able to help you, but we have had some good success with the business development team. They're kind of like the high holy ground. And then, the US based SaaS reps, of course, are able to help a little bit more than maybe like the Costa Rica teams, but there's a much higher minimum revenue for the US SaaS teams.
I don't think I have any accounts working with the business development team. What's involved there? Is it new accounts, small accounts, massive accounts? How do you get in touch, or how do you work with the biz dev team?
So usually you're going to work with a partner agency. So if we have a brand that's a good fit, we submit it to Amazon's new business development program on their behalf. And then we're assigned a rep if we're accepted, if that brand is accepted. They have to, they want to see that it's a brand that has good potential volume. But I think it's less than $5,000 in sales in the last 12 months. So it's kind of like helping establish brands on to Amazon. It's a really, really great program. It's not right for everybody, but for those that are, we've had some emerging brands on it. If they have, they've had good DTC sales or things along those lines, or even like they're launching, but we have some reason to show that it will be worthwhile for Amazon. But it, kind of comes down through that connection.
Is that Megan's team? I think it is, right?
Yes, Megan, yeah.
Okay. So yes, I didn't realize that's what it was called. I never called it that. Obviously I know Megan, and I do have clients and accounts in that new product program. It's similar to Launchpad. It's not exactly the same. And yes, so if you have a brand which is essentially established elsewhere, but new to Amazon, Amazon will handhold you. It's not necessarily for a person with an idea and a just launched product. No, they want products which sell elsewhere and want to come onto Amazon. They love those brands because they've already done work in development and bringing things to market. So for those people coming, they'll do extra work in hand-holding. They help in creating listings. They help in navigating technical issues that are annoying for new sellers. I think they're pretty good at that stuff. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and in a lot of issues with GTIN and brand name changes, they are one of the few teams that are able to produce results. There are times when, something just isn't able to be fixed, or we say it's not worth the hassle, especially if it's a new launch of a new product and it's just easier to change it than have to postpone launch to get things straightened out. Another story I wanted to tell you was an established brand always have bought their UPCs from GS1. They've been in business for decades. But they have seasonal products, right? So they have products that are popular in pop culture, and they change them out. So about 10 years ago, they recycled a UPC that was assigned to their brand, and then they used it again for a new Amazon listing. Now, at the time, you could request kind of an exemption to have a second item on the same UPC. Fast forward to 7 months ago or so, we went to update the listing to help it increase conversion rate, update the images, and they got a violation for changing the fundamental meaning of the listing. And when we had to escalate, and finally we found out it's because Amazon was still recognizing that first UPC from a zillion years ago. And they basically were saying that we had made this change inappropriately, that we had changed the product. And so it was a big, big hassle. So if you have products that have UPCs that are even tied to your brand, it's important not to recycle those on Amazon as well.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that you could legitimately recycle UPCs. Is that...
You're not supposed to.
Got it. So it's
but
not
10 years
it's
ago,
not
it wasn't
an official
big of an
thing.
issue, yeah.
Right. It's not an official thing. I guess I don't want to give anybody the idea that it is a thing. It's generally not a thing.
Don't do that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, let's add the disclaimer to that story. This is not you. Whoever you are that's listening, you can't do this.
Yeah.
The fact that the story happened doesn't mean you're protected.
Well, and we actually weren't able to get that one fixed, I don't think. So, they had to recreate the new listing with it. So when it comes down to your products, you want to make sure the UPC has never been used before on Amazon and that it's registered to your brand name. I was only sharing that story to say, hey, you might think this is a good way to save $42. And if you have a reticence from like, I don't want to buy GS1 barcodes because they were expensive. When you looked last, you might have had to buy a bundle of 10 or 20. Now you can buy one or two. I want to say it's like less than $40 or $50 for an individual UPC. If you know that you're going to have several products, it can be good to buy a block. This way your products have sequential UPCs. That's not necessarily a requirement. You know, can just buy a single UPC now on GS1.
Yeah, they also, if I'm not mistaken, they also have rental options. So a rental option, I think, is $10 a year. So for those people who genuinely don't want to commit to 40 or 50 for X many SKUs, which can be much more, renting it for the first year and then buying it, is your way to test.
So the other thing is, and we talked a little bit about this on the brand registry, is you want to purchase your UPCs after you've gotten your brand registry approved to make sure that you can make sure that the brands match. Now, a while ago, as long as you weren't a big brand, it didn't really matter if it didn't match. But now we're finding even on small brands, even with more minor discrepancies, we're seeing some rejections or where we have to escalate tickets. So it is important to make sure that those match. And the only way to do that is to get that brand registry first, because you might find that you need to adjust the way that your brand is presented, caps, all caps, space. There might be something that you are not anticipating. So we always recommend doing that first.
Yeah, so that I was actually going to ask exactly that. I was going to say, are they as picky as brand registry is? So brand registry, we spoke about it. They are very, very picky down to spaces and all caps and like every arrangement, plural versus singular, like you name it. If you like Bob's Pizza versus Bob's Pizzas, if it's one place, with the other place a different way, you're going to get rejected in brand registry. Is GS1 that picky? And I guess the connected question is, can GS1 adjust in their system what they show it as an easier fix?
But it's not really as GS1 picky because you enter in whatever you want into GS1.
Right.
It's more that Amazon is going to be picky and you get a mismatch error.
Right.
Yeah. So,
no, but I'm saying, can we fix the mismatch error by fixing it with GS1? You're not fixing a wrong entry with the USPTO. For a trademark, whatever is submitted, no changing. You just have to file another one with like a character different. But with GS1, they might be a lot more flexible for fixing those things.
Well, and we have had instances where we were able to prove the ownership. So maybe there was a difference and we were able to take the time to prove the UPC ownership and that it was tied to the brand. Maybe we had to show like the hierarchy of the companies. And so it's not to say that those are impossible. They're just a lot more difficult. And we don't know if those policies get stricter in the future, if it can come back to bite you further down the road. So in general, just to play it safe, that would be what my recommendation is. We have had UPCs with GS1 where the brand owner went and said, hey, this was already used, and they were able to make something work with them. But we're not usually involved in that because the UPCs affect things beyond Amazon.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. It's an interesting, it's funny. I thought that this is going to be a small subject, but no, there's a lot of angles to this, and there are a lot of details to getting your UPCs right.
Well, and so even if you think you're going to always be a direct-to-consumer company, you never have any plans to go into brick and mortar, you do want that uniformity to be able to work with things like inventory jugglers and things like that.
Wait, I have never heard this term before. What is an inventory juggler?
So it would be something like Channel Advisor or SKU Vault or something along those lines that manages inventory across multiple places. So your internal warehouse, FBA, and then manages kind of with a flat file those different marketplaces.
Interesting. I never heard it put that way before. I don't know what I was expecting from the term. I mean, I know those companies, and generally, like you said, if you have inventory in a few places and you sell on a few channels, they connect the inventories and the channels and make the orders go smoothly. So, yeah.
And you can do a lot of that with MSKUs, which, could be a whole other episode in of itself, why it's important to have like a naming convention when it comes down to MSKUs, because it really, really does matter. But it matters at a certain point, and if you're planning on doing certain things, I guess. But it can be really, really helpful.
Oh, yeah. I think we need like a naming series because you need to name SKUs, You need to name ad campaigns. You need to name ad groups. Any place where you could put any place where you can put an identifier, you better have a system. But their randomness equals disaster.
You want to just kind of follow those best practices. Like sometimes people will be like, oh, I got around it this way, I got around it that way. So my impression from talking to sources at Amazon is if you sidestep when it comes to this UPC issue, because they're really trying to avoid things like counterfeits. And my conspiracy theory, I'm going to put my foil hat on, is the crackdown happened right after Amazon was found liable for recalls. So I think one of the reasons is that they're trying to really make sure that if there is a recall for a specific product, which is primarily shared via GTIN, that they're able to catch that in their system as quickly as possible. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing for people, all of us that order from Amazon. But so it comes from something to try to keep our customers safe and to try to make sure that, brands that have purchased legitimately are able to use those UPCs as expected.
I never thought. So when you say the notifications happen via GTIN, what does that mean exactly? If a company like, I don't want to say a company because they might be upset about me suggesting that they have a lot of defects, but if a smartphone manufacturer has a defect and they need to let everybody who has this smartphone know about the defect, what do you mean that they let people know via GTIN? Is there some system in place that notifies the whole world?
Yes. So FDA does a lot of the recalls. It is more of an issue when it comes to food. And I think that's why you saw the crackdown on UPCs and bundles in the food category first. Is because foodsafety.gov, they list, recalls and alerts. I would imagine, I haven't gotten that far down the conspiracy, but I would imagine that the recalls notices that I've seen have included UPCs. So I imagine that was something that was easier for computers to parse than, trying to figure out product names and things along those lines.
Well, let's talk more about this grocery situation. So for those who weren't aware, Amazon in late 2024 came out with a policy in which they said that the only UPCs which are acceptable for grocery products are UPCs issued by the manufacturer. So one thing which happens commonly in the grocery space is third-party sellers will put together bundles of food products and sell it under their own name. And those need their own UPCs. A company will make a trademark for that brand of their own, but they'll be selling groups of products from somebody else. So they might be selling a brand of potato chips. They'll make it under Bob's Chip Store, and Bob's Chip Store will be what's trademarked, but they're selling the common brands of potato chips, and they might offer a 5-pack where the brand doesn't offer a 5-pack. Or they'll offer a variety pack of 6 flavors, which you can't get anywhere else. So those typically end up with UPCs, which are not tagged to the brand. Now, it's interesting because unlike a lot of cluttering things in Amazon, this actually serves a very good purpose. The reason it serves a purpose is 1-packs of small food items are almost never worth selling on Amazon. There's simply no way the economics worth it, either for Amazon or for a seller. And most manufacturers don't have quantities in UPCs. They might send the store, pallets of product, but that doesn't have its own UPC for the quantities. So when these sellers offer a 3-pack or a 5-pack, the price can be perfectly fine. If a thing costs 99 cents and they're selling a 10-pack for $9.99, the value is appropriate, but 10 of those things with wholesale versus fees versus margins does not work for 1 unit. So this is a case where the third-party offerings actually add to the value of Amazon's catalog, but Amazon is still cracking down. Everybody had an uproar when they issued this new policy, and they changed a little bit. They basically said that we understand that not every UPC will be from the manufacturer, but you still need permission from the manufacturer. So that little bit of extra terminology, the fact that if you have permission from the manufacturer, you can start to use your own UPCs, frees up a lot of flexibility in the catalog now. I don't think that it has played out in what we see yet, but I guess we'll see soon enough. It was supposed to be taking effect around now. Haven't seen much, but I guess we will.
And, from a brand perspective, that bundling caused issues in that they weren't able to control, like, especially if something had a melting temperature or it wasn't only shelf stable at a certain temperature. But more importantly, like if there's a recall on one flavor of chips, it might get missed in that recall. Because usually when recalls do happen, they give you a UPC and a lot code. And so not being able to kind of search by UPCs was a little scary for some of our brands. And then also we found that there's some brands in the grocery that were like, I don't know how they have this SKU because we haven't made it in 3 years and only has a 2-year shelf life. So, it became like a safety issue. Now, I'm not saying that all of those concerns were completely valid, but it was something that we have run into a couple of times. An edge case, not an everyday case. There were really good uses of those bundles in some ways where it really helped people to buy a multi-pack. But if you are connected with a brand, which is a really great thing, if you're managing Amazon for a brand that doesn't have the resources to use Amazon as a primary distribution channel, that can be a really great way for you to kind of build up that exclusivity by getting authorized UPCs where you can create these bundles or even custom SKUs or Amazon only SKUs to help them market where you're not having to worry about price suppressions.
Yeah, Amazon only SKUs are super important. They add a lot of value to the market when they're done properly. So if there are sellers out there who can find brands that don't really have their selection out there, going to those brands and saying, hey, let's work together. Let's create an Amazon specific selection. That is absolutely the way to build a relationship with a brand and a way to bring brands to Amazon. That's one of the few models that work that don't require you to build a brand yourself these days.
And it can be really, really effective. And then, they're handling that UPC management for you. They're, maintaining that so you don't have to worry about a lot of these things, and they're already going to be brand registered more than likely, or you can get them brand registered. That also allows the content to be locked down so they can avoid potential legal issues when it comes to if somebody has a grocery bundle, they might not think to put something about an allergen, or they might not put the nutritional panel. All of those things can be an issue for brands, especially if they have a customer base that has, a large allergen following. There was a company recently that changed their formula on a gluten-free product to include pea protein. And people were getting sick and they didn't know why. If that allergen is not updated and doesn't have a fresh new listing, then it can cause a lot of issue for people who thought they were just getting the same thing they've been eating for years.
Wow. Yeah, what a world we live in. I was just telling you a little bit ago about the Brooklyn brunch I went to, in which every form of restrictive diet was catered to. Everything from vegans to nuts to dairy to, I don't even know what the full selection of options were. But yes, the world of dietary restrictions for people keeps growing, and being able to stay on top of it is super important.
So, when it comes to UPCs, it's really pretty simple. If you're going on a video that you saw on YouTube from 5 years ago, just take that out of your feed. You don't want to do that. You want to follow kind of the letter of the law going forward.
That's probably good advice for everything to do with Amazon on YouTube. The first thing you want to do is filter out anything that's older than 6 months old.
Yes.
And then the second thing you want to do is filter out everybody that has a Ferrari in their screenshots. The one and two, you will have eliminated 46% of the misinformation, if not more.
And always trust but verify, right? So if somebody's saying it's okay to go ahead and do this, take the time, do a search in Seller Central, look at the terms of service. If you have an agency, talk to them about the potential risks of it. They should be able to walk you through that. So it just, if you're getting new information on Amazon from people that aren't necessarily tied to Amazon, including us, if we say something is okay, go check to make sure it's okay, because you can't go to seller support and be like, well, even Robin said it was fine. They'll just laugh at you. So always, there's this responsibility that Amazon expects us to have as sellers.
Yeah, I hear that. And I agree wholeheartedly.
So I hope this episode has been helpful, and I hope it helps you avoid some of the UPC nightmares that we've seen over the years. And this has been the Top of Search podcast. We hope you have enjoyed listening to it as much as we have recording it, and we hope you have a prosperous week.
See you soon, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Top of Search podcast. Have a burning question you would like answered or a topic you would like featured in a future episode? You can submit it at topofsearchshow.com. If you love the episode, subscribe and leave a review. Each month, we'll be selecting one reviewer to win a one-on-one call with your choice of Abe or Robin. Winners will be announced at the end of the first episode of every month.